Nobody agrees on the number anymore. Some say 300, some say 500. The old-timers in Cincinnati, the ones who still sweep the floors of dojos that don't exist anymore, swear it was closer to 1,000 crammed into a gym built for half that many. But every single one of them agrees on one thing. They agree on the silence. Because for one moment, in a packed American gymnasium sometime in the mid-1960s, the loudest sport in the country, full-contact point karate, the sport that built its reputation on noise, on showmanship, on grown men screaming before they'd even thrown a punch, went completely, totally quiet. And when it ended, the man walking off the mat wasn't the one everyone expected. This is the story they still tell about that night. Not all of it can be proven, but the man at the center of it was real. The wins were real, and what happened to the myth of the fastest man in karate was real too. Pattern interrupt, before we rewind. You need to understand something most people don't know. Chuck Norris, the man whose name later became a punchline for invincibility, Chuck Norris doesn't dial 911, he dials the crime and waits for it to surrender, was, in the 1960s, not yet a myth. He was a fighter, a very good one, hungry, disciplined, climbing the same brutal tournament ladder as everyone else in American karate. But there was a name above his on that ladder, a name history quietly buried, the way history buries anyone who wins against the man destiny has already chosen. That name was Vic Moore. Setup: the man nobody remembers, but everyone should. Cincinnati, 1965. A young black man named Victor Moore stepped onto the floor of the USKA Grand Nationals, the biggest stage American karate had, at a time when most dojos in the country wouldn't let a black student through the front door, let alone hand him a black belt. Moore didn't ask for permission. He won. He became one of the first African-American fighters to take a major national karate title in the United States. Not a footnote win, not a regional trophy. The Grand Nationals, the only tournament every serious fighter in the country circled on their calendar. And he didn't stop there. Over the next decade, Moore built a resume most fighters today would assume was fiction if you read it out loud. He fought and defeated some of the most feared names of the golden age of American karate: Joe Louis, Mike Stone, Bill Superfoot Wallace, Mike Foster, and, according to the record books of the era, Chuck Norris, multiple times. This wasn't a one-off upset. This wasn't luck. Moore beat Norris on the tournament circuit during a stretch when Norris was building the very reputation that would carry him to Hollywood. While the world was being told, decades later, after the movies, after the action hero legend was cemented, that Chuck Norris was untouchable, there was a man who had already touched him, repeatedly, on the record, in front of judges, crowds, and cameras that mostly didn't survive the decades. So why has almost nobody heard his name? Because legends get written by the people who win the long game, and Vic Moore never had a movie studio behind him. The ego that built the myth. Here's where the story gets dangerous, not for the fighters, but for the truth. Tournament karate in the 1960s wasn't just sport, it was theater. Fighters built reputations the same way boxers did, through talk, through showmanship, through the stories that spread between gyms faster than any newsletter could print them. And one story, repeated in dojo locker rooms across the country for years, became something close to gospel. That Vic Moore, the man who had beaten national champion after national champion, had grown tired of one persistent rumor. The rumor that there was a fighter coming up through the ranks that was simply faster than anyone Moore had ever shared a mat with. Faster reflexes, faster hands, a blur that judges struggled to score because by the time they saw the strike land, it was already finished. The fighter behind that rumor was Norris. According to the story passed down through Midwest karate circles for half a century, Moore wasn't impressed. He'd beaten faster men than this kid, he told the room. He'd beaten faster men than Chuck Norris before Chuck Norris had ever built a reputation worth talking about. It's the kind of line that gets repeated for 50 years, precisely because nobody can prove or disprove it. But here's what can be proven. Moore's record on Norris on the circuit was real. The confidence wasn't manufactured out of thin air, it was earned, fight by fight, point by point. And confidence like that, spoken loud enough, in a sport built on reputation, it doesn't stay contained in one gym, it travels. Pattern interrupt, the problem with beating someone once. Here's something every fighter from that era understood, and every casual fan misses. Beating someone once in point karate proves you can win a moment. It doesn't prove you can win a man. Tournament karate scored on points, fast touches, controlled strikes, blink and you miss it exchanges, judged by officials standing close enough to get hit themselves. A single match could turn on one bad angle, one slipped step, one half-second of hesitation. Which means every fighter Moore beat walked away from that loss carrying something most spectators never saw, the burning, private certainty that it wouldn't happen again. Norris was no exception.
And by every account from people who trained alongside him in that era, Norris didn't respond to a loss by complaining about the judges or blaming the mat. He responded the way the men who eventually become legends always do. He went back to the floor, alone, for hours nobody was watching. The tension nobody talks about. By the time word got around that Moore and Norris would meet again on a tournament floor, the karate world wasn't just watching a match, it was watching a referendum. Was the first result real, or was it the kind of fluke that happens once in combat sports and never gets repeated? Every fighter on the circuit had an opinion. Every dojo owner had a side. Bets weren't placed in money, they were placed in reputation, which in that world was worth far more. The gym that night filled up faster than the organizers expected. Folding chairs ran out first, then standing room along the walls, then the doorways packed 3 and 4 deep with fighters who'd driven hours just to see this. Not because anyone had advertised it as a spectacle, but because word travels through a tight community faster than any poster ever could. Picture it. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of canvas mats and old sweat baked into a gymnasium that had hosted 100 forgettable matches and was about to host one nobody forgot. Somewhere in that crowd, men who would go on to become legends themselves stood shoulder to shoulder with teenagers who'd just started training, all of them there for the same reason, to see if lightning struck twice. The wait before the storm. Tournament karate didn't have walkout music, no entrance ramps, no pyrotechnics, just 2 men standing at opposite ends of a roped-off square of mat while a referee in a stiff collared shirt checked both fighters were ready. Moore's corner radiated the calm of a man who'd already done this before and seen no reason it should go differently. That calm, earned or arrogant depending who you ask, was its own kind of pressure on the other side of the mat. Norris's corner radiated something else entirely. The stillness of a man who'd spent every spare hour since the last loss rebuilding something inside himself that he wasn't going to let slip again. The crowd noise, loud just minutes earlier, started dying the moment both men squared their stances. By the time the referee raised his hand to start the match, the gymnasium, packed wall to wall with fighters, trainers, and spectators who'd been talking over each other all night, had gone almost completely silent. Even the chairs had stopped creaking. Pattern interrupt. Why this mattered more than a trophy. There was no championship belt on the line that night, no prize money worth mentioning. In an era before televised karate, before pay-per-view, before any of it became the spectacle it is today, this match wasn't being fought for money or for a title. It was being fought for the only currency that actually mattered in that gym: truth. Whoever walked off that mat would carry the answer to a question the entire American karate scene had been arguing about for months. Who was actually faster? the proven champion or the rising name everyone said couldn't be touched. The match. The referee's hand dropped. For a fraction of a second, the kind of fraction only fighters noticed, neither man moved. Then Norris closed the distance first. Fast, faster than half the room expected, even after everything they'd heard about his speed. A blur of motion toward Moore's open side, the kind of attack designed to end an exchange before the opponent even registers it started. His hands were already moving, not backward, not retreating, sideways. A small, economical shift that took him just outside the line of the strike, close enough that the miss was visible to everyone in the front rows, far enough that the point judges had nothing to score. A gasp went through the crowd. Not loud, just a collective intake of breath, the sound of several hundred people leaning forward at once. Norris reset, faster this time. The exchange that followed happened in less time than it takes to read this sentence. Hands moving, feet shifting, both fighters reading angles the untrained eye in the bleachers couldn't even track. To the crowd, it looked like blur meeting blur. To the judges sitting ringside, close enough to see what the audience couldn't, it looked like something else. It looked like a man who had already solved this puzzle once and remembered every piece of it. Moore's counter landed clean, a controlled strike, scored, acknowledged by raised flags before half the room had finished processing what they'd just watched. Point, Moore. The gym didn't erupt. It couldn't, not yet. Everyone in that room understood this wasn't over. A single point in a sport built on speed and recovery wasn't a verdict. It was a spark. Norris reset his stance. Whatever doubt had crept into that corner in the seconds after the point, it didn't show on his face. According to those who trained near him in that era, this was exactly the moment Norris had spent months preparing for. Not the winning moment, but the moment right after losing one. The moment where lesser fighters start rushing and better ones start thinking. He didn't rush. The next exchange ran longer. Feints, false starts, both fighters reading each other's weight shifts for an opening neither was willing to gift the other for free. Then it happened fast.
Norris closed again. Same angle as before, but this time with a setup buried inside the first attempt nobody in the crowd had clocked as a feint until it was already too late to matter. Moore's read was a half step behind this time. Not a miss exactly, not yet a hit either. The kind of half-beat delay that in a sport scored on inches and instants separates a clean point from a contested one. The judges' flags went up. Slower this time. More of them split. The gym, dead silent since the opening exchange, finally let out a sound. Not a cheer, not yet, just the kind of murmur that happens when several hundred people realize at the same moment that the story they came to see might not have the ending they assumed. Pattern interrupt. The part no footage survived to prove. No reliable film of this exact match is known to exist today. Most regional tournaments from that era were never recorded at all. Cameras were expensive, film was expensive, and nobody filming a Tuesday night gymnasium match in 1960s Ohio thought they were capturing history. What survives instead is something arguably more powerful and more dangerous: memory. Repeated and reshaped by every gym, every generation, every retelling for almost 60 years. That's the only honest way to tell you what happened next, not as verified fact, as legend, the kind that gyms keep alive specifically because nothing else survived to replace it. The final exchange. What the old-timers describe next isn't a single dramatic blow. It's smaller than that, stranger than that. They describe a final exchange that lasted, by every account, only a few seconds, and ended not with a knockdown, because point karate didn't work that way, but with a clean, uncontested strike that every judge on that floor raised a flag for at the exact same instant. No debate, no split decision, no murmur of disagreement from the crowd. Just 4 flags rising together, and a silence that, according to everyone who claims to have been there, felt heavier than the silence at the start of the match, because the start of the match was anticipation. This silence was confirmation. Aftermath. What happened in the seconds after is where the legend splits depending on who's telling it. Some say Norris simply nodded, the way disciplined fighters do when a decision lands against them and there's nothing left to argue. Some say the gym took a full breath before anyone moved at all. Some say Moore didn't celebrate, didn't need to, because for a man who'd already beaten this same opponent before, the result wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation of something he already understood about his own speed. What isn't in dispute, according to every retelling that has survived across decades of dojo storytelling in the Midwest, is this: nobody in that gymnasium left quietly. Word of that match didn't need a television broadcast to spread. It moved the way everything moved through American karate in the 1960s, gym to gym, state to state, carried by fighters who'd seen it with their own eyes and couldn't stop talking about it for years afterward. And somewhere in that retelling, the rumor that had started the whole rivalry, that there was a fighter coming up faster than anyone Vic Moore had ever faced, quietly stopped being repeated as fact. It became instead a question nobody could answer with certainty ever again. Pattern interrupt. What this actually proves. Here's the part that matters more than who won a single match on a single night decades ago. Chuck Norris went on to become one of the most recognizable names in martial arts and action cinema in history. A reputation built fairly on real skill, real titles, and a real career that outlasted almost everyone he shared a mat with in the 1960s. But greatness was never built on a record clean of losses. It was built on what a fighter does after one. And Vic Moore's career proves the other half of that same truth, that some of the most important chapters in a sport's history happen far from the cameras, far from the championship belts that get remembered, fought by people the history books were never built to include. Legacy. There's a reason fighters from that era still tell this story, even now, even with the details blurred by 50 years of retelling. It isn't really about who won, it's about what the match proved. That speed isn't a reputation, it isn't a rumor that travels faster than the fighter it describes. It's something that has to be proven again, every single time, against every single opponent, no matter how many times you've already proven it before. Vic Moore proved it against some of the greatest fighters of his generation. Chuck Norris proved it too, in the decades that followed, against the entire world. Two fighters, one era, a single gymnasium in the middle of America that the history books mostly forgot to mention, but the people who were there never did. If stories like this, the ones history almost lets slip through the cracks, are the kind you want more of, subscribe. There are more of them buried out there, waiting to be told.